Hi, my name is Jennifer Toronto, and this is She Shall Be Praised, a podcast about faith, being a woman, and finding strength in the everyday. This is my second recording. My first one I just posted was really about what this podcast is about. This episode is going to be on a podcast that I wrote in 2008. I actually wrote it April 15th of 2008. And I decided to go back. I edited it a little bit and re-release it. And I did it because it's really timeless. And honestly, the things that I was struggling with at that point in my life were things that um, many of us struggle with really at different points throughout life. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then I'll go a little bit more into the background of why I wrote this and what was going on and what was happening in my life at the time. So, um, Finding Peace in the Midst of a Storm, Part 1 of 3. Originally published on April 15, 2008, edited and updated for today. I originally wrote Peace in the Midst of a Storm in three parts. For readability, I've decided to keep that format. I didn't want to keep us too long. Part 1 discussed what the word peace really means. Part 2 explores the purpose and function of the storms in our life. And Part 3 examines the Bible for insight into how to find that peace. So, this next statement is a sentence that I wrote in my journal, and that entry was July 19, 2005. The irony when I read the sentence is this was about a month and a half before Katrina. I know growth is a process, and that rapid growth comes with great pains. I just pray that God will give me endurance. I hate being so emotional, almost schizophrenic in my dealings with our situation. One day I am at peace, the next I'm in pieces. As I began to examine the question of whether or not we can have peace during a storm of life, I realized that I didn't have a clear understanding of what peace should look like. How can I find a path to peace if I don't really know what I'm looking for? So I decided to first get a clear picture of what peace is and then continue my search from there. I consulted the American Heritage Dictionary to get a basic definition of peace. This dictionary tells us that there are essentially two types of peace. I'll call them interpersonal peace and internal peace. Or, in the dictionary's words, freedom from quarrels and disagreement, harmonious relations, and inner contentment, serenity. I thought to myself that peace should include inner contentment and serenity, but those descriptions of peace seemed lacking, passive, and somewhat empty, as though somehow a person could just not care or not feel. As a mother to young children who are by nature challenging because they can't satisfy their own needs, I knew it wasn't possible to always have serenity, and something seemed to be missing in that definition. I then consulted the Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary, and I found something richer. The Bible Dictionary describes peace as a condition or sense of harmony, well being, and prosperity. The biblical concept means more than the absence of hostility, and it is more than a psychological state. The Hebrew word shalom and its derivatives were not a negative or passive concept, but involved wholeness and completeness. Hebrew peace is full and active. The peace that God desires us to have does not involve resigning yourself to your miserable circumstances. God's peace brings life into your situation. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. John 1:4. I knew serenity might not be possible when caring for a very sick infant, but a sense of harmony, well being, and prosperity just might be achievable. Perhaps the biblical concept of peace between people better illustrates this principle. The Bible dictionary continues on to define peace as referring to completing or repairing a relationship. A bilateral treaty of peace would mean that both parties promise to refrain from hostilities against each other and furthermore, to seek the other's welfare. At the point where human peace stops, godly peace presses further forward. God's peace doesn't simply eliminate strife and misery. His peace promotes health, well being, and happiness. Now I was getting somewhere. Both the common definition of peace and the biblical definition of peace address internal peace and peace between people, as mentioned above. But the biblical concept of peace also includes peace with God. The Bible dictionary says God's covenant of peace with his people would involve the assurance of an enduring relationship with the one who is our peace and a pledge to protect their welfare and to abundantly bless them by his divine grace, wisdom, and power. In other words, Christians have an additional source of and requirement for peace, God himself. In my darkest hours, I might not have serenity, but I could promote health, well being, and happiness, make peace with God, and trust Him to protect and provide for me. Do you have a sense of harmony, well being, and prosperity? Do you feel whole and complete? Do you feel safe and abundantly blessed? If you answered no to any of these, then please continue on with me to the conclusion of this three-part essay. God offers this kind of peace to us, to me, and to you. Anyone who enters into the covenant relationship offered by Jesus can have this. For as Jesus says in John 14:27, peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. I do not give you as the world to you as the world gives. Your heart must not be troubled or fearful. Jesus would not command us, saying, your heart must not be troubled or fearful, if such a thing were not possible. You can have this peace he offers, yes, even in the storms. For it is in the storms of life that your heart would most likely be troubled and fearful, and it is there in the storms that we most need his peace. So that's really the end of the first part. What is peace? And I want to go back a little bit to something I said, that it felt empty, that his that the standard definition of peace, which is just serenity, felt empty because it's really hard to be serene when you have a sick and crying child. It is very difficult. And what God's definition says is that you can promote well-being and happiness and health. You may not have serenity, but you can promote those things. If you have a sick child and you're exhausted, you're overtired, you can't make this baby feel better no matter what because they just don't feel good and they have no way to express it or fix it. You can at least rest in the knowledge that what you're doing matters and is making a difference and it's not forever. And you, just like you're taking care of that baby, there's someone who's going to take care of you. And so that was that definition of peace, that was one that I could grab onto, right? That was achievable for me. Whereas serenity was most for a young mother, absolutely not achievable. So I'm gonna go back to I mentioned at the beginning that I would talk about what I was going through. And it's really relevant now, I think, with what's happening in our lives and in the country and all. Um, So at the time, that was in 2008, in April of 2008, my oldest was about 7 and a few months, and I had four, and they were all 2 years apart. So my kids at that time were 7, 5, 3, and 1. And I always thought I'd only have one child, and I had him, and he was just such a miracle. He was so amazing. He was the most amazing thing that had happened to me up to that point. And I didn't think I was easily going to have children because I wasn't terribly young. I mean, I was 26 when I had him, but um, I had already been married several years at that point. And so I just thought I was going to have a hard time having kids when I finally did. And I only ever really wanted one. I was an only child, and I didn't know what it was like to be in a bigger family. And I thought, you can't really give them all the same attention. But when I got pregnant for my second son, all I could do is laugh because I'm like, okay, like my firstborn was only about a year old when I got pregnant for my second one. And so I was just, again, amazed. And within 2 weeks, I could already see differences between the two of them. With my little one, who was 2 weeks old, was already different from his older brother. And then I got pregnant again. And at this point, I began to think, maybe I'm not going to have trouble having kids. Um, but things were still, I was just still being amazed at being a young mom and having these kids and realizing that this was truly the most amazing thing that happened to me until this point. I made a person. And then Hurricane Katrina hit. And I actually found out that I was pregnant about a week or two before Hurricane Katrina. And when we came back a week after Katrina passed, nothing was open. None of the doctor's offices were open. It just wasn't happening. So I couldn't go to the doctor and I lost that baby. That was actually my third miscarriage. And I was just heartbroken. Um, my area was devastated from Katrina. Families were devastated. I had lost a baby and I wanted another one at that point. And so I got pregnant again fairly soon after, just a few months later, and had my fourth. By the time I had my fourth, we were already having money troubles. And for my third and my fourth, I remember this distinctly. But when I went into the hospital to have my third son, I, at the time, didn't think we were going to have enough money for me to pay the house note. And all I could think is, I'm going to go into the hospital and I'm not going to have a home to come to. And with my fourth, it was the same thing, same thing. So the money problems were already there. I wasn't working. I mean, how could I go back to work with four kids? That wasn't going to happen. And I wasn't going to make enough money to make it worth it. And besides that, taking care of them was the most meaningful thing I had done in my life to that point, quite frankly. And um, so finances were bad. I was constantly exhausted. I had entered a journey where a time in my life, before having my oldest, I did whatever I wanted. If I wanted something, I did it because I always felt like, well, it's just me. If all I'm hurting is me, it's no big deal. And then when I had kids, all of a sudden, I can't do that anymore. I actually have to be a good person because now I have to raise kids. And I could hurt myself, but I certainly didn't want to hurt them. And so I went from being in many ways undisciplined, emotionally undisciplined, and all of a sudden I had to become disciplined. And and I couldn't. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. Life doesn't work that way. You don't go from uncontrolled to disciplined like that. It just doesn't happen. It is a process. And so over and over, I would do things that I didn't want to do. And then I'd feel guilt because I was doing those things. And on top of that, my marriage was in trouble. Um, that's a whole other story, but so it was like the conjunction of all of these things. Um, Having four young children, 7 and under, by this post, 2008, four young children, consistent financial trouble, marital trouble, and then trouble with who I was and trying to become the woman that I thought I should be. And so that's where I was when I wrote this. And the cry of my heart truly was, how can I find peace? How can I how can I, while working through these challenges and these storms and try to figure it all out, also have peace? That's where this came from. And So I want to ask you at this point, if you're listening, shoot me a message. You can go to my website, sheshallbepraised.com. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram and just, shoot me a little something. Are you going through a storm in your life? Are you having trouble finding peace? Have you ever really thought about what the word peace means? And did this help you? You know, I would love to hear from you. And I would love to hear if there's anything else that you'd like to talk about. So this was the end of part one. Part two will be coming soon. I'm working on these on the weekend. So I might edit it today and then, revisit it next Saturday and get it out then. But um, so I would say that maybe in the next 2 weeks, the next two parts of this will come out. I do also want to write about things that I'm working through now because I'm in a different place now. Let's see, that was in 2008. So, I'm, 17 years older? And that's a lot happens in 17 years. So, I've enjoyed this. I hope you have too. And I really look forward to hearing from you. So please shoot me a note and check out my other things.